It's Thorsday. I'm Tom Scioli, author of Jack Kirby, The Epic Life of the King of Comics, and Fantastic Four Grand Design, and the upcoming Jack Kirby's Star Warriors, starring Adam Starr and the Solar Legion. Today we're talking about Journey into Mystery number 96. Thrill to the battle of titans as mighty Thor faces the awesome power of Merlin the Mad. Behold, Thor, your power is nothing compared to the mystic arts at my command. Merlin's enchantment has stilled my arm. I cannot move. How can I break his spell? Superheroes, supervillains in the marvelous Marvel style. This is another Thor issue that Jack Kirby doesn't work on the interiors, but he does deliver the cover. And my understanding of how these things are put together is that Jack and Stan come up with a cover concept, and I would guess more often than not it's Jack himself coming up with a cover concept, which is done before the interior of the book is written or drawn. So, Kirby having story input into these stories, at least he comes up with the idea of like, hey, let's bring back Merlin, let's have him have his magical powers that are more than a match for Thor, and let's have them fight it out in Washington, D.C. Stan and R. Burns and Joe Sinnott, you can take it from there. Who knows whose idea it is? Kirby's worked with Merlin, before and after this, and most notably in The Demon, sort of, a similar concept, bringing Merlin back into the modern age. But Stan, a very prolific editor and writer of comics, he's done his share of Merlin stories too, most notably the Black Knight stories that he did with Joe Maneely. This general concept, I'd love to see an issue, by Jack Kirby, start to finish with this basic concept. It's a strong one. Kirby does introduce other pantheons to the Thor comic when he introduces the pantheon of the Greek gods with Hercules and Zeus and that whole crew. I can't help thinking that Kirby, being such a fan of the tales of King Arthur and Merlin, I wouldn't be surprised if had he done the entirety of this issue, that he might have introduced Arthur's Camelot as almost like a parallel universe, like a parallel to Asgard, sort of this kingdom that still persists to this day, but in some far off dimension, and we get Merlin, but then maybe we get Arthur and Lancelot and the whole crew, like we do in The Demon in the 70s. So let's get started. So Thor's at the waterfront. Story plot, Stan Lee. Script, R. Burns. Art, Joe Sinnott. Lettering, Art Simic. So there's this sarcophagus coming in. It's actually a pretty good setup for a story, which again, it's possible that Jack Kirby, co-plotted it, just uncredited co-plot, which wouldn't be the first or the last time. This is the first Thor comic that we've read so far where I'm actually like tempted to do a redo, like to try to take this basic concept and try to make it something cool, because it is kind of a cool idea. They have they just found Merlin's tomb, Merlin's crypt, and they're bringing it at the New York Museum, which is interesting because most of the story takes place in Washington, D.C. You still got the long hammer, what somebody referred to as a polo mallet in the comments of a previous video. So Thor rushes back, and he had just had an adventure that we haven't seen yet, and he had to give Jane Foster an excuse for why he had to cut out real fast, and she's angry at him. He stood up all his patients. They all left, and she hasn't gotten any kind of satisfactory explanation out of him about where he was and what he was doing, and that she feels like he's gonna run his practice into the ground and sort of take both of them down with it. We get a flashback. Dr. Blake can't tell Jane this, but he's telling us about his adventure. A bus sunk into the water. Now, usually when you see this in a Superman comic or the Superman movie, the bus is maybe hanging off the edge of the bridge and he has to rescue them. But this is a pretty grim situation. That bus is underwater, and I sure hope those people are okay. We got some bubbles coming out, so that means there might be some air still in there. He goes down, he ties a rope around it, and then throws it into the air and throws the bus, and it's there. I would have liked to have seen some passengers get out of the bus just to make double sure they're okay. So I hope that Thor didn't just, rescue a bus full of corpses. Jane suspects that Don Blake, when he went into the other room without an explanation, that he was napping in the next room, and she says, she hears the news flash. The East Side Bus Company just reported that Thor has rescued the sunken bus with all its occupants. That's good enough for me. Okay, everybody's okay. There, that's what I call responsibility. You wouldn't catch Thor napping in his lab. Poor Jane, if she only knew. So now they're talking a little bit about Merlin, and we cut back, and they open up, Merlin's crypt, and there he is. It's a pretty good setup. Kind of reminds me of like a Universal monster movie, like Dracula or The Mummy, and in this case, they're opening up Merlin's crypt, and you have Merlin the wizard. Like I said, this could be pretty cool. And I don't recall Kirby ever revisiting this character like the Marvel Merlin, other than that cover. So, it would be nice to see Jack Kirby's spin on this concept. So he wakes up, and we find out that he's just been sleeping. It's another one of his spells. I think that's part of the Merlin mythology, that he's just sort of sleeping and he'll come back. And then there's the stuff about him like aging backwards and all this kind of stuff. But anyway, he wakes up and he reads the paper. JFK speaks to nation on TV tonight. And so he finds out that in this day and age, the king is referred to as the president, and it's John F. Kennedy. And so we have a flashback to him back in the olden days, doing his magic. But he reveals that it wasn't actually magic, but that he's one of the first mutants. And those are, powers he has. New satellite to be fired into orbit today at Cape Door. It's 1963. It's the space age. It's the Kennedy era. We have rockets taking off. He tries to sabotage it. Thor goes out and fixes it, puts the rocket back on its course. He doesn't see any physical tampering, so he assumes that it must be sort of supernatural tampering. So he checks with Loki, but Loki's still chained up. Like last issue, so Loki's kind of like Hannibal Lecter in Silence of the Lambs. He might have been the villain in a previous story, but in this one, he's, giving Thor the clues he needs to find the real villain, and he tells him that it's actually Merlin, and that Merlin's back. So Merlin finds out that Thor was the one who ruined his scheme, and so now he challenges Thor to a duel. So okay, we're finally getting to some cool stuff here. Excuse me, Mr. Secretary, but this screwball just turned up. Says he's Merlin, and he wants to see the president. So I don't know if this is somebody famous, Kennedy's press secretary, but then this guy right here is famous. Here's JFK with, his pompadour looking really great, and there's his daughter Caroline, and Merlin, walking by, says, perhaps that man with his daughter is. No, he looks too young. I'll have to search further till I find the president. So yeah, JFK, this young, handsome president, Merlin passes him by because that guy is too young to be the president. Now this issue kind of also reminds me of a lot of Alan Moore's 1963, just because it's 1963. We got JFK, who shows up in Alan Moore's 1963. And just there's so much period stuff, like so many references to real people and real places that is very specific to the 1963 era. It makes me think that this might have been one of the specific comics that Alan Moore was thinking of. In fact, this almost reads like a comic that was made, in the 90s or the 2000s or maybe even today, that's trying to be an old-timey comic, an old 60s comic, and sort of going out of their way to shoehorn in a lot of cameos and references. It's got a lot more than sort of the average comic would have had at the time. Another excuse to maybe do a remake of this, because like I said, it's another one of these non-Kirby issues. It's not that great, but out of all of them, this one has the most potential. This one could have been great, and had Kirby worked on it Thor comes down. He crashes through the White House window, which just seems kind of wrong. That seems like something a villain would do in a 60s comic. He could have used the door. Throws his hammer at Merlin. It passes through. They're duking it out. There you are rooted to the floor while I escape as free as a bird. By the time your paralysis wears off, I'll be ready with the weapon that will destroy you. Great Odin, he may succeed at that. His power is almost equal to Loki's. So then he goes, and the weapon he gets is the Washington Monument, which he levitates and throws at Thor. Seems like overkill. I did a comic once where the hero throws the Washington Monument at a giant space vampire, and it acts as a stake through the heart and kills the space vampire. So Thor throws his hammer, the little handle catches onto the tip and sends it right back where it belongs. And now Merlin, is on his tour of Washington, D.C. He lifts up the Pentagon, and Thor knows what he's up to, so he digs a trench, lays in it, kind of like we saw in a previous issue when Merlin puts the Pentagon back down over Thor. Thor's got a little place to hide. He pops back up. Now, this is the part I kind of wish, Jack Kirby could have drawn, or maybe, Rick Veitch in an Alan Moore written issue of 1963, featuring Horus, who was their Egyptian Thor stand-in. But he animates Abe Lincoln at the Lincoln Memorial. And so now Thor's getting attacked by a giant Lincoln, and we just see Lincoln's legs, which is a little disappointing. I would have liked maybe a full splash of Lincoln kind of looming over him, kind of like the Statue of Liberty in Ghostbusters 2. But I think also they're trying to be maybe a little bit tasteful here, and having silhouette might be a more tasteful way of doing this. But I don't read comic books looking for good taste. I want sort of gonzo, in your face insanity more often than not. Uses the wind from his hammer to blow Abe Lincoln right back onto his chair, onto his throne, and now he's going to try to scam Merlin in sort of like like how Superman deals with Mxyzptlk, or whenever he gets into one of these situations, and kind of like how Thor scammed the aliens, the Stone Man first Thor story. He bangs his hammer so that he turns back into Don Blake, but he bluffs Merlin. He says, Merlin, I have magic more powerful than yours. I can actually turn into anything, just like how I turned into this guy with a walking stick. So if you don't give up, I'm going to turn into something, really insane and scary, and just, stomp you into dust. And so Merlin takes the bait. He falls for it, and Thor says, Don Blake says, okay, all you got to do is put yourself back in your coffin, do whatever spell you did to make yourself fall asleep for 1,000 years, and just stay asleep for another 1,000 years. And I guess we'll just deal with you then, the future, the people of the year 2063 will have to deal with you. It'll be their problem. And Merlin says, well, how do I know you're not just going to kill me, when I put myself to sleep in the coffin? And he says, you have Thor's word, but remember, if you should ever awaken to menace mankind, I'll be waiting for you, and I vow to show you no mercy. So Thor plans on sticking around, and why wouldn't he make it to 2063? He made it to 1963. He's an immortal, so I don't know if Roy Thomas or somebody did a follow-up story to this that takes place in 2063 with the 2063 version of Thor, whether it's still the same Thor or some son of Thor or daughter of Thor or some successor to Thor. But yeah, Marvel, if you need somebody to do that story, I'm your man. Merlin's back in his little sarcophagus, and Jane Foster says to him, well, I must admit that if you do lose a few patients at the office, you lose no one at the operating table. As a surgeon, Dr. Blake, you're a magician. So, that's a little, a little bit of, gallows humor or something. Thanks, Jane. You don't know it, honey, but there's more truth than fiction to what you said. The end. So, great news. next week's issue, Journey into Mystery number 97, it says a super special issue because Jack Kirby's back. Lee and Kirby combine talents to bring you Mighty Thor battling the amazing Lava Man. And also beginning in this issue, Tales of Asgard, Fantasy and Legend from the home of the Mighty Thor. So that's exciting. I'm ready for Kirby to be back on Thor. And so he's coming back next issue. And then we're going to have Tales of Asgard. So even though, later issues, we're going to have some more non-Kirby main stories, we will always have a Kirby Tales of Asgard backup in every issue from this point forward. So, that is great welcome news because these non-Kirby issues, they're pretty rough. This is another one I've never read before, and I did not have a great time reading it. Although I did have a pretty good time imagining a, better version of this comic. I'm Tom Scioli, author of Jack Kirby, The Epic Life of the King of Comics and Fantastic Four Grand Design, and also the upcoming Jack Kirby's Star Warriors, starring Adam Star and the Solar Legion. I'll see you next Thorsday.